This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Today is Tuesday, August 16th, and I'd like to provide parents with some advice for how to study history in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. While I've done this work in the Classical Liberal Arts, my real area of expertise is in world history. My studies in college were not just classics, but classics with an emphasis on ancient history. So I've been a history teacher now for over 20 years, and I wrote the entire world chronology course for anyone who's studied that course, which has been a favorite among students. But I'd like to provide some advice for how to go about studying history, because we offer quite an excellent set of courses for any students who would like to really dive into history studies. First of all, there's the World Chronology course, which is really intended to be sort of an introduction to the study of world history. The whole idea of chronology is to simply learn the historical order of events and to memorize, as we do in the World Chronology course, to memorize a set of key events in world history. And the purpose of memorizing these key events is so that we have a framework in our minds of those key events in world history, so that any time we're studying anything, whether we're reading literature or studying the Bible, learning about politics, any area, anything we study or think about, our knowledge of world chronology always allows us to place things in history. And this is very helpful, because if we simply know the chronology, we can begin reflecting on any event, any person, any time, and can draw conclusions that are helpful for us in thinking about things. For example, if I were to talk about the fact that Aristotle taught Alexander the Great, we could then think and ask, well, when did that happen? When did that happen? And a student who had studied world chronology would know that, Alexander the Great died around 323 BC. So this time with Aristotle had to be before 323 BC, and Aristotle was born in 384. So this time where Aristotle taught Alexander the Great had to take place sometime around 350, 340 BC. And the knowledge of chronology quickly helps us to zero in on when a certain thing took place, just because we know the events that are memorized and learned in the World Chronology course. The reason why I made that World Chronology course originally, I made that course way back in 2005 when I was a classroom teacher, is that I had the responsibility to teach classical literature to high school juniors and seniors in a private prep school. And my first year of teaching, the first week of class, as we started to talk about literature, I started to realize that my students really had no idea when things took place in history. So I started asking them questions just because I was curious. And these were kids who had a great education in a private prep school. I just started asking them questions like, do you think that Solomon ever read the epistles of St. Paul? Do you think that Cicero was aware of the teaching of the Christian church? Do you think that the prophet Daniel ever sang the Psalms? Do you think that the Apostle Peter knew the Nicene Creed? And I would just ask students these simple questions, and they really had no idea. These kids were considered highly educated college prep students, and in all of their studies and all of their learning, one thing that they never acquired was a simple knowledge of world chronology. And I realized that so much of their struggles in the study of literature, so much of their struggles in the study of the Bible, of writing, of any kind of debate in controversial questions, all the different kinds of exercises that they did, the reason why so many of them struggled was because they lacked a basic knowledge of world chronology. And so I put together an entire history program that I began teaching to high school freshmen to try to eliminate this problem. And I taught my world chronology course to high school freshmen. And that's where that world chronology course came from. That was the purpose of it. It was an introduction to world history to provide students with a framework of historical people, events, places, and dates, so that students would always have this system for reference in their minds. And I would drill them on all of these key events, and we would memorize them through the course of the year. And it was effective because it was sort of a joke with my students that anytime that I ran into students years down the road, they would ask me to quiz them on their world chronology memory work. And it's the kind of thing that just sticks with you. The dates and the events stick with you, and they're very useful. Very useful in any kind of analytical study of literature or history or scripture or theology. It's taken for granted that people know the chronology, but many don't. So that's the purpose of that world chronology course. And I wouldn't say, in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, I wouldn't say that it's for high school freshmen. It's really for younger students in the academy to prepare them for high school level history studies and provide them with that framework to benefit them all through those higher level studies while they're in school. So I would recommend the World Chronology course for any students, I would say from ages 8 up to 14, as an introduction to world history, to prepare them for future history and philosophy and literature and theology studies. Once we get to high school, there's another course titled World History. And this is a much more in-depth study of world history than my world chronology course. And I would recommend that this be the first history course studied by older students looking for history courses. This world history course studies an excellent textbook that goes through ancient history, classical Greek and Roman history, medieval history, and modern history through the time of the world wars. It's a really great textbook, written by a great historian, and I strongly recommend that anyone getting started in the study of history at the high school level or above begin with that world history course. Now, in the high school program, we actually divide that world history course over the first 3 years of high school. In the freshman year, they study ancient and classical history, I think, and then in the sophomore year they do medieval and modern, and then in the junior year they repeat the whole book. So it's actually studied over 3 years in the Academy High School program, but I recommend that as the first history study. If a student is working independently outside of the high school program, I recommend just studying the world history course from beginning to end. It's a great course. Once world history is finished, we have an excellent American history course as well. Great textbook. I review all the textbooks, go through all of them, look for key points where I would consider bad ideas to be entering in, and efforts of the textbook writer to push ideas that I really don't want our students being distracted by. And so the textbook for the American history course in our program would be intended for a high school student, and again, it's a really great American history course. If a student gets through that, so through world history and through American history, we have 2 other courses that could be considered high school history courses that I'd recommend. One is an American government course, which is really great. In the beginning of the textbook, it introduces all of the philosophical principles that influenced the American government, and then it goes through the actual history of the development of the American government. A really great course. That's American government. And then lastly, there's a course available on economics. So world history, American government, and economics. These courses would provide a really excellent high school history education for an elite student. Like I said, in the high school diploma program in the academy, we don't get into the American government or the economics course. We study American history in the senior year, and then we divide the world history over the first 3 years. But the ideal high school level history study that I would recommend would include the study of world history, American government, and economics. That would be an incredible preparation for future studies. Now, if a student wants to continue in history studies beyond those courses, let's say an adult student wants to go beyond those courses, the entire series of the Cambridge ancient, medieval, and modern histories are available for study. And that's really intended for lifelong study. So if you look at the course catalog, you'll see that there is ancient history, classical history 1, 2, and 3, medieval history 1, 2, and 3, and modern history 1, 2, and 3. That's for a lifelong study of history, which I strongly recommend for any adult students who want to just continue studying and gaining a deeper and deeper knowledge of world history from what I would consider the best source for history studies that exists, the Cambridge histories. So in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we have a whole range of history studies, starting with world chronology from the grades 2 through 8 period, then getting into world history, American history, American government, and economics, and then for lifelong adult study in the Cambridge histories. We really need to develop the intellectual culture that is enjoyed through the study of history. We hear people refer to themselves or refer to others as history buffs. If there's anyone who should be interested in becoming a history buff, it should be Catholic students, because the history of the world is Catholic history. And many of the arguments raised against the Catholic Church are historical arguments that are actually not grounded in a sound knowledge of history, but are mere interpretations of history or assumptions about history. And it's very important for the defense of the Church and of the Catholic faith to be thoroughly grounded and expert in the study of world history. So all of that's available in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. I'm responsible directly for all of those courses. So if you're interested, feel free to enroll and get started. And I look forward to going through these studies with you as we seek to become history buffs by immersing ourselves in the study of world history and discussing how that history relates to the Catholic faith and our life in the modern world. I hope that's a helpful overview. That's what I would recommend for anyone interested in studying history who'd like to do so in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. God bless.